Welcome to the 81st episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We continue with Book 7, The Justice of the Remedy, Chapter 5 of Property and Land in the United States. George writes, some 12 or 15 years ago, 1879 minus 12 is 1867. 1864. What a funny thing, 12 or 15 years ago. Right at the end of the Civil War, the late Ben Wade of Ohio said in his speech in the United States Senate that by the close of this century, every acre of ordinary agricultural land in the United States would be worth $6.50 in gold. Now, this might be that typo. This might be dollar pound $50 in gold. I suspect that 6 should be a dollar sign. $50 for any acre of ordinary agricultural land in the U.S. It is already clear, what would we say, $50 in 1865. About $1,000. Cost per acre of farmland. It's about, what, 630? It's about $4,000 per acre now. It is already clear that if he erred at all, it was in overstating the time. In the 21 years that remain of the present century, if our population keep on increasing at the rate which it has maintained since the institution of the government, with the exception of the decade which included the Civil War, there will be an addition of our present population of something like 45 millions. An addition of there will be an addition to our present population of something like 45 million, an addition of some 7 millions more than the total population of the United States as shown by the census of 1870, and nearly half as much again as the present population of Great Britain. Population of Great Britain in 1879. About 31 million, which what? So yeah, half again as much. So 150% of the Great Britain population is the American population. There is no question about the ability of the United States to support such a population, and many hundreds of millions. Wait. They had 31 million. How much population of Great Britain now? They've only gone from, in like 150 years, they went from 31 to 67. There's no question about the ability of the United States to support such a population and many hundreds of millions more, and under proper social adjustments to support them in increased comfort. But in view of such an increase of population, what becomes of the unappropriated public domain? Practically, there will soon cease to be any. It will be a very long time before it is all in use, but it will be a very short time as we are going before all that men can turn to use will have an owner. It's all going to be bought up. But the evil effects of making the land of a whole people the exclusive property of some do not wait for the final appropriation of the public domain to show themselves. It is not necessary to contemplate them in the future. We may see them in the present. They have grown with our growth and are still increasing. Oh yeah, it's fitting to read the Henry George quote of the day. Well, it's actually not from Henry George. Um, I'll just show you. All right, whatever. This is written by Albert Mayhem, The Anti-Rent War on Blenheim Hill, 1906. I don't know, Blenheim. Land tenures have been at the bottom of a large part of the social and economic trouble in all ages. The Licinian laws of Rome, 367 BC, provided that no person should hold more than 500 jugera. A jugerum was about half an acre, so 250 acres per person was the Licinian law in Rome in 367 BC. By the time of Tiberius Gracchus, this law had long since become a dead letter. The agrarian law advocated by him was 133 BC, so about 230 years later, still BC. It proposed to take away from the great proprietors. I'm beginning to learn that proprietors in antiquity meant, or at least around 1900, meant landholders, specific, generally. Um, the greater part of Italy was then owned by 2,000 persons. All the lands they were occupying over and above the amount named in the old Licinian law. The lands thus resumed by the state were to be allotted in small holdings to poor citizens and made inalienable. The aim was simply to put the people into possession of their own. Holders of these lands, long in undisputed enjoyment, had come to look upon them as absolutely their own. Moneylenders who had made loans upon them opposed all efforts to disturb the spurious titles. Spurious titles meaning I don't know, ill-gotten or not valid. These are, again, these are the titles we're saying that are in violation of the Licinian law, and so they shouldn't be valid. Like people shouldn't be able to have more than 250 acres, or otherwise known as 500 jugera. This new land law affected a great amelioration. This means a reduction or smoothing or alleviation of the distress among the poor, and large districts that had been almost depopulated again became covered with cottages of sturdy peasants. Italy seemed in a fair way of being redeemed from the curse which the monopolization of the soil by the rich had brought upon it. But history repeats itself. In the 5th century after Christ, so that's going to be like 630 years later, as in the time of Tiberius Gracchus, the great masses who tilled the soil had not a clod that they could call their own. The same conditions prevailed in France before the Revolution, skipping a quick 1,000 years. The nobility, with its 80,000 families, pensioners of the king, ornaments of the court, living in riotous luxury, held 1/5 of the lands of France and paid scarcely any taxes, while the bulk of the population, some 25 million persons, lived by hard labor and lived in want. Yeah. What was the date of the French Revolution? The 80s? Yeah, 89 and 99. Is there like a good French Revolution movie? Like I want an old one. Scarlet Pimpernel. None of these things. I'm just gonna hope maybe one of these would be like, oh yeah, I've heard about that movie. It's considered a classic. Anyway, back to George. Talking about the population in the late 1800s. George says, we plow new fields, we open new mines, we found new cities, we drive back the Indian and exterminate the buffalo. We girdle the land with iron roads and lace the air with telegraph wires. Oh, this Indian, I recently saw this clip, YouTube, Wounded Knee, battle at Wounded Knee clip. Is this like the low quality version? Where's the one I want? Maybe I know it looks like the one I watched. No, this is just the battle. Where's the meeting? This is probably shouldn't do this in the Henry George Daily Devotional, but I'm getting what's the word? I don't know. This is where they meet and talk. I guess this is it. Alright, so yeah, the American forces are having a meeting. Alright, for my listeners who can't see, I don't know what tribe Sitting Bull is part of, Dakota or something. They're all gathering around, and the American forces are also lined up, but they're gonna parlay. So then they sit together.
Sitting Bull requested this council. We await his words.
Take your soldiers out of here. They scare the game away.
Very well, sir. Tell me then, how far away should I take my men?
You must take them out of our lands.
What precisely are your lands?
These are the lands where my people lived before you whites first came.
I don't understand. We whites were not your first enemies. Why don't you demand back the land in Minnesota where the Chippewa and others forced you from years before?
The Black Hills are sacred land given to my people by Wakantonka.
How very convenient to cloak your claims in spiritualism. And what would you say to the Mormons and others who believe that their God has given to them Indian lands in the West?
I would say they should listen to Wakantonka.
No matter what your legends say, you didn't sprout from the plains like the spring grasses, and you didn't coalesce out of the ether. You came out of the Minnesota woodlands, armed to the teeth, and set upon your fellow man. You massacred the Kiowa, the Omaha, the Ponca, the Oto, and the Pawnee without mercy. And yet you claim the Black Hills as a private preserve bequeathed to you by the Great Spirit.
And who gave us the guns and powder to kill our enemies? And who traded weapons to the Chippewa and others who drove us from our home?
Chief Sitting Bull, the proposition that you were a peaceable people before the appearance of the white man is the most fanciful legend of all. You were killing each other for hundreds of moons before the first white stepped foot on this continent. You conquered those tribes, lusting for their game and their lands, just as we have now conquered you for no less noble a cause.
This is your story of my people.
This is the truth, not legend.
And then they shoot each other.
Crazy Horse has surrendered with his entire band. And by his surrender, he says to you and your people that you are defeated. And by ceding the Black Hills to us, so say Red Cloud and the other chiefs who demand that you end this war and take your place on the reservation.
Red Cloud is no longer a chief. He is a woman you have mounted and had your way with. Do not speak to me of Red Cloud!
I suppose you are the only chief then. Sitting Bull is king of all the Indians. Humility is One of the 4 virtues of a Sioux chief. Sitting Bull shows his true nature now.
I have had my say with you.
And I have had my say with you.
Then we will have a fight.
So be it.
Now, that clip manages to make the white guys look almost good when the whole line is there that we're doing it for no less a noble cause. It's like, yeah, we're just keeping this shit going and we have guns. But it is apparently this Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee was a book written in the 70s that was quite well researched by D. Brown, and is what sort of started off a bunch of like the modern, modern uh, perspective, I guess, on how the white man decimated the red man. Um, and so it's funny to then watch this actual depiction of it that was so sort of like that clip there is not quite so sympathetic to the Native American. Anyway, why do we all have to fight over land? So George writes in 79, when was the battle at Wounded Knee? I mean, this was all taking place, I guess it went down in 1890. So 11 years. That's, huh. That's interesting. I guess like, I think of George 1879, he's like out there. I guess I know that he's only a decade or two post Civil War, but the way I know in his life, he's like, wow, I guess yeah. It's funny to look at the timeline. You feel like the Indian American, Native Americans were, I guess that, yeah, that was just before the 20th century. To me, I always think of that as being like so long ago. Even though the 20th century is long, but I don't know. Huh. So after George writes or says, we drive back the Indian and exterminate the buffalo, we girdle the land with iron roads and lace the air with telegraph wires, we add knowledge to knowledge and utilize invention after invention, we build schools and endow colleges, yet it becomes no easier for the masses of our people to make a living. On the contrary, it is becoming harder. The wealthy class is becoming more wealthy, but the poorer class is becoming more dependent. The gulf between the employed and the employer is growing wider. Social contracts are becoming sharper. As liveried carriages appear, so do barefooted children. We are becoming used to talk of the working classes and the propertied classes. Beggars are becoming so common that where it was once thought a crime, little short of highway robbery, to refuse food to no one who asked for it, the gate is now barred and the bulldog loosed, while laws are passed against vagrants which suggest those of Henry VIII. I guess that's when vagrancy laws were big in England. Or I don't know, when was Henry VIII? 1509, 1547 was his reign. Long, long ago. We call ourselves the most progressive people on earth, but what is the goal of our progress if these are its wayside fruits? These are the results of private property in land, the effects of a principle that must act with increasing and increasing force. It is not that laborers have increased faster than capital. It is not that population is pressing against subsistence. It is not that machinery has made scarce work. It is not that there is any real antagonism between labor and capital. It is simply that land is becoming more valuable, that the terms on which labor can obtain access to the natural opportunities which alone enable it to produce are becoming harder and harder. The public domain is receding and narrowing. Property in land is concentrating. The proportion of our people who have no legal right to the land on which they live is becoming steadily larger. Yeah, that's interesting. Proportion of American renters in the last century. More households are renting than at any point in 50 years. Since at least 1965. Huh. Says the New York World, a non-resident proprietary like that of Ireland is going to be the characteristic of large farming districts in New England, adding yearly to the nominal value of leasehold farms, advancing yearly the rent demanded, and steadily degrading the character of the tenantry. Okay, gonna have a lot of renters in New England. And the Nation is also a periodical, alluding to the same section, says increased nominal value of land, higher rents, fewer farms occupied by owners, diminished product, lower wages, a more ignorant population, increasing number of women employed at Bard, outdoor, which to them was a rougher job for women. What does employed at Bard really mean, though? That's what they're gonna keep saying. Bard. What's it? Not Bard College. What is Bard employment? All right, we'll ask AI. Okay. What is Bard employment in antiquity? I don't. I don't think George means a bard as what is bard employment? Here, we'll give it the full passage. What does bard employment mean in this passage? It appears to be a typographical error or a misreading. The correct term likely intended is hard employment. Way to go, ChatGPT. You did it. Yes. That goes in our typos. We know that it regularly messes up hard and bard. I mean H and B. I guess, but that's also weird. Increasing number of women employed at hard. Hmm. Interesting. Uh, Outdoor labor, sure sign of a declining civilization and a steady deterioration in the style of farming. These are the conditions described by a cumulative mass of evidence that is perfectly irresistible. That is I finished the quotation from The Nation. George continues, the same tendency is observable in the new states, where the large scale of cultivation recalls the latifundia that ruined ancient Italy. This time I remember that latifundia refers to the plantations in ancient Italy. In California, a very large proportion of the farming land is rented from year to year at rates varying from a fourth to even half the crop. When was East of Eden set? It's set. Oh, right. It's early, yeah, around nine. It spans several decades, but it leads up to World War One, or even maybe through World War One. Yeah, that's all about California land, farming families, and the troubles they go through. The harder times, the lower wages, the increasing poverty perceptible in the United States are but results of the natural laws we have traced, laws as universal and as irresistible as that of gravitation. I think that we could sum those laws up as, there's the basic law of humans seek to satisfy their desires with the least amount of exertion. And then there is sort of the laws of the law of rent, the law of wages, the law of interest. I'm not going to sum them up right now. So George says, we did not establish the republic when, in the face of principalities and powers, we flung the declaration of the inalienable rights of man. We shall never establish the republic until we practically carry out that declaration by securing to the poorest child born among us an equal right to his native soil. We did not abolish slavery when we ratified the 14th Amendment. To abolish slavery, we must abolish private property in land. Unless we come back to first principles, unless we recognize natural perceptions of equity, unless we acknowledge the equal right of all to land, our free institutions will be in vain. Our common schools will be in vain. Our discoveries and inventions will be but to add to the force that presses the masses down. Powerfully said, and I get it, but it is perhaps a little hyperbolic, or just technically, you know, I don't know. I just have trouble exactly ever equating wage slavery and chattel slavery. Um, and it's easier to just call slavery slavery. I don't know. Maybe it's better to actually use a more broad term for slavery. There are different kinds of slavery. I don't know. I guess I am in my context, in my era, in the 21st century. The term slavery is 99% of the time referring to black slavery in America, when I hear it used. Anyway. All right, that finishes book 7. Well, we're at book 8 now, the application of the remedy. See you next time.